All right, you're welcome back to the show. This is a time to have the second conversation for the day. All right, you recall that earlier in February, or it began late last year, where there was, we've been agitating for electoral reforms and amendments to the electoral bill right there. And so the Senate, passed the bill to have the clause real-time e-transmission removed from that amendment, from that electoral, act. And that was the Senate's version. But for the reps, they had a different version, insisting on e-transmission in real time. But the Senate wanted to have that manual, transmission or manual results, be had as a backup, in case the e-transmission thing failed. And just
there was a time we're having this word glitch.
Yes, because
technical
of
glitch.
technical glitches, because of technicalities, and or unenvisaged technology failures and all of that. And so we should have manual collation as backup. But the people began to protest. There was, protests severally at the NAS. There was even a protest yesterday. And for the harmonization of that bill, where the Senate and House of Reps will come together, to agree upon what the bill would eventually be and the act that will be passed. Yesterday, at that, event or that session at the National Assembly, there was a walk. Some of the opposition lawmakers staged the walkouts, those that were in the minority in the sense of the numbers of those who assented to that and those who were against it. Several, issues around it right there. And so this morning we'll be talking to an informed person in this, a political, an activist and a political analyst right with us on the show, Dr. Ayo Ologun. You're welcome on the show, Doctor.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. All right, so we had you earlier when this e-transmission, manual collation and all of this, when it was, still ripe and at the Senate at the time, where we had this dissenting or varying versions of it. But now that harmonization has already taken place. And we want to know, what are your views on this, especially with what happened at the NAS yesterday?
Well, it is very important to understand that what in itself is called democracy is a game of numbers. It's a game of interest, and it's at the same time a game that involves not just the immediate need, but a foresight into the future. That's exactly the difference between democratic rule and that of the military rule. So what we saw at the National Assembly yesterday, for me, is another example of the beauty inherent in the democratic process of decision-making and, of course, of law passage. You will recall that the argument forth and back has been about electronic transmission of results. If you cast your mind back to the 2023 election, at a point, the INEC rescinded its earlier position that the IREF is not a portal for determination of electoral results, that it was only a platform to showcase what has been collated, and of course a lot of Nigerians raised doors. Oh, this was not what you promised us. Oh, this is contrary to your earlier declaration that only results on IREF will be the official results and all that. But that taught us a very critical lesson, which brought us forward to the 2026 deliberations at the National Assembly about whether or not electronic transmission of results should be the sole transmission process or there should be a backup. And you will recall that the House of Rep initially decided on the e-transmission thing alone without the thought of a backup, until the Senate came in to say that, look, even in Nigeria, we all use the networks available, and we know how unreliable sometimes these networks could be. That, look, let's have a backup just in case, or just in places where there are no network or there are no means of transmission. We can reverts back to the manual model of transmission. And that is what raised us. That's what caused protests by a lot of Nigerians. I saw Wale Adebayo, I saw Mayele Sowore, I saw a lot of other, Obi Kwesili and a lot of other many Nigerians who hit the National Assembly yesterday in protest, demanding that only the electronic means of election transmission should be allowed. But I understand that some of these things in itself have some political undertone, and it has projection by political parties and political gladiators of intention. Like I often say, nothing happens in politics by mistake. Nothing happens in politics by accident. Everything that happens in politics is premeditated. So you can imagine what the Group A and the Group B are already envisaging or planning as part of their political strategies ahead of the 2027 election. But if you want to be objective as Nigerians, you would agree with me, or let me say, this is my opinion rather, that the position of the National Assembly in the Joint Committee yesterday was the right thing to do. And I'll tell you why. We live in a nation where, even though we try to pretend like we are one of the world's biggest technology advisors, or we are one of the best users of technology in the world, but the reverse is the case when you are faced with reality. There are some times that even in the city centers, you hold your mobile phone and for 10-15 minutes, there is no network on your phone to even make calls, send text messages, or even interact through the data process. And then you begin to wonder, what is wrong? And then they will tell you, oh, it's network issue. Oh, the network is down. Oh, it rained. And this has happened and that has happened. Don't even forget that most of these mobile carriers or mobile network carriers are even trying to move from the use of masts powered by diesel or other forms to the underground laying of pipes whereby they can transmit data and all of that. So in a nation where we are still battling with transition from mass use of mass as a means of data transmission to the underground use, underground cable use of transmission, and in the birth of all this, we lose network, and then you begin to wonder. I travel a little within the country Nigeria. There are parts of the country, particularly in some part of the east and particularly the Niger Delta, where you go to and you do not even find network at all. Go to Nembe in Bayelsa, go to some parts of Delta, Marabo and the rest of them in Delta. Once you are on the ferry, once you are on the ship, or once you are on the boat, forget anything called mobile network. And that does not mean the election does not take place in those places. On the day of election, some of those places have polling units, they have polling centers, they even have collation centers, whereas anything called mobile network is strange to them. Sometimes even in places where they have. Sometimes a particular mobile network goes off in 3-4 days. So if you want to go by the protest of Nigerians that are demanding that should be e-transmission only, the question would be, what happens to the rights? What happens to the franchise? What happens to elections or votes cast on the day of election in places like some of the places I have mentioned? Are you saying those people will be disenfranchised? Are you saying their votes will not count? So I think for now, the position of the National Assembly is the way to go. Yes, e-transmission of results, backed up by manual transmission of results, especially in places where there might be no network or where there might be network failure. Yeah, that is the dream. We want to get to a place in Nigeria where we can even do e-voting, where you can vote for the comfort of your home or for any part of the world. But until we get to that level, we need to be conscious of decisions we make, so that in an attempt to go global, we don't disenfranchise a majority of people within democratic space. So I understand that some of the people's argument is that, look, on the day of election, the federal government or the incumbent party, the APC, might decide to frustrate network and use that as an alibi for manual transmission of results. It might be their own way of rigging election. Why the incumbent party is also alleging the opposition party, oh, they are trying for e-transmission of results because they know that they have people who are going to compromise the process, who are going to compromise the network or compromise the backup space of data for them and all of that. But by and large, it doesn't matter the opinion of these political gladiators. It has to do with our reality. And our reality in Nigeria is we don't have network covering every nook and part of the country, and even there could be network failure. So I think the National Assembly is just in tune with reality.
All right, Doctor, two quick questions. One is from what you raised just now, talking about the fears about the incumbent, government, and then the opposition as well, having people in places of power, especially in this telecommunications, amongst the telecommunication operators that may want to, sabotage, whatever the outcome of, the process and all of that. But does that not speak to a decadence in our institutions? I mean, if telecommunications operators are there, the laws are there guiding. If the government had been following the laws, if the people themselves, that is the operators, had been following the laws, if everyone was doing what they were supposed to do by the book, then probably nobody will be able to hold you by the jugular to make you do what you don't want to do. That's one. Two, the thing about people saying that we've seen videos of bandits in thick forests, in bushes, having internet connection. How do they get their internet connection? People have argued severally that the government, whatever it is they want to do, they do it. They can achieve whatever it is they set their minds to achieve. So with the issue of internet access and all of this, why is it an issue in 2026? We had 4 years to plan for another cycle of elections, general elections. What happens then? Why could they not call the same telecommunications operators and have their heads put together so that we can have a headway? We know we cannot get there in a day, but at least doing things better. Why do we have to be drawn back several years from where we were?
See, there's no way you want to go about it. The federal government is culpable in all of this. But then you want to also look at limitations of the government and the intentions of the government. See, as a people, we are quick to judge. We are quick to raise dust. But the question would be, where were we as Nigerians since 2023 when we had last had election? Why did we wait till 2026 before we started raising dust? We started having protests to make demands for electronic transmission. Why didn't we start this agitation right from when the 2023 election was completed to mandate and to compel the federal government to do the needful, telling them that, look, we don't want to hear stories ahead of 2027 election. So now that we have finished 2023 election, we are compelling you to start doing the needful. We all went to bed pretending that all is well. And then all of a sudden, when the political atmosphere became charged, we all woke up from whatever side of the bed, started making demands and agitation. So as culpable as the federal government is, with not having good intention or the political will to do the needful, we also should blame the people who went to bed, all of us, yourself and myself inclusive, who went to bed in 2023 only to wake up in 2026 to make demand for what we cannot achieve between now and February that the election is slated for in 2027. That is one. Number two, look, I told you, in my opinion, nothing happens by chance in politics. Everything is pre-planned. What makes you think? I'm just thinking. What makes us think, or what makes me think, that the federal government or the incumbent party do not already foresee that this will happen and deliberately slow down the process or the law or the push that might have made the telecoms to do the needful in ensuring that there is network coverage everywhere in Nigeria? Look, like I said, there are places in the Niger Delta, particularly in the riverine area, even in some parts of Ondo State, where once you get to, you don't even see network. I see this often. I have interactions, I have business to do around this Niger Delta area. So I know that there are places that once we get to, we even tell ourselves that, look, whatever call you want to make, whatever transaction you want to make, whatever information that needs to be sent, you better do it before we get to the place, because we know that once we cross that line, the rest is history. But if the federal government has had the political will, they probably will have given the drive to these telecoms to cover these places where there are no networks before now. But even though at that, you look at the terrain, the question is, some of these terrains are unaccessible, that it takes a lot of investment to be able to go to have data connection or to have network provided in some of this terrain because of the hard terrain. For example, how do you install a mast in a place where covering about 200 kilometers is all water? And we're not talking about surface water. We're talking about water with about 50 meters or 100 meters of depth. So the possibility of installing masts in such places are almost impossible. So the only thing that is possible is what you call the underwater cable. And this in itself demands a lot of resources, which most of the time, some of these telecom industries know fully well that investment into such underwater cables will not translate into profit, because what is the percentage of people living in these areas that we are talking about? What's the percentage of people living in Nembe? What's the percentage of people living in Akotobo in Ondo State? What's the number of people living in Nairobi area of Ondo State and the rest of the Niger Delta area? So once they know that investment will not translate to profits, they would not want to make such investment of running underwater cable to such places. So it's only the federal government having the political will that could have invested in connection of data to such places. But then, like I earlier said, two things comes in. How politically willing is the government of the day, knowing fully well that this might impact on their so-called political strategy of winning election. How willing would they want to be politically to do it without having to give us excuses of no fund, oh, it was not budgeted for, oh, it's going to, the laying of cable is going to take 2 years, it's going to take 3 years. So if we put all of this into consideration, we will agree that we have a long way to go. But some people, we must create the habit of not going to bed after every election. Once failures are noticed in a particular election chain, we must begin to make agitations for correction of such mistakes or for correction of such insufficiencies ahead of the next election, and not just waking up 6 months, 8 months to election and making demands that are unrealistic.
All right, Dr. Comrade Ayo Ologun, talking about realities here. A lot of Nigerians have said that IREF does not actually need internet to work. Now, I would like to hear your opinion regarding this, with the back and forth of Nigerians saying that the real-time transmission, e-transmission of results should be done, since IREF does not need internet. The argument of the Senate or the National Assembly is in situations whereby there is no internet to upload the results at the polling units. Now, if IREF can work without internet, a lot of Nigerians have argued that the Senate can go ahead to pass the bill of e-transmission, immediate transmission, real-time transmission rather, of results, if IRF can work without internet glitches and all that. What would you have to say in your own opinion as regarding IRF working without internet?
You are getting it wrong, and so is a lot of Nigerians. IRF as a portal does not need internet to work. But you see what is called e-transmission. That E simply stands for electronic transmission. And this is the way it works. At the polling unit on the day of election, once elections are conducted, the votes are counted, the Form ECH is filled with the figures called by each political party. The agent of each political party would have to sign to accredit that true, this is the reflection of our vote. Once that is done, you will need a mobile phone to snap it or to scan that result, collated, filled, and signed by party agents. You will need to either scan or snap that result and send via the internet to the IRF portal. It is the IRF portal that does not need internet. But the process of transmission from the polling unit
to the
IRF portal will require data. Or how else do you send a result from the polling unit, whether scanned or snapped? How else do you send it to the IRF portal, if not by either WhatsApp or by email or by whatever other means that technology approves for? So there is no way. You will still not need the electronics what's called data to transmit from the polling unit to the IRF portal. So it is the IRF portal in itself that might not or that will not need the internet. But what about the process of getting the result to the IRF portal? And that is where some Nigerians are getting it wrong. So if you are saying the INEC can go ahead and pass the bill for the information of results, because IRF does not need data, the question would be what happened to the process of transmission from the polling unit to the IRF in itself. That is where we get it wrong a lot of times.
All right, Doctor, several people, civil society organizations, some pockets of individuals have been calling for electoral reform for quite a while now. You may have even been part of some committee, talking to or writing different, petitions to the National Assembly for an electoral reform. And here is an amendment bill being passed. We saw two of the amendments, the one about notification given to INEC from 360 days reduction to 300 days. Is this amendment, is it people-centered? Because you talked about interests and, and all of those. Which of the interests are these people actually serving? If we had two amendments in this particular amendment that was passed, which of these is people-centered? Is this one that we have, you find people protesting against this. So how is it people-centered? Let's have your view on that.
See, I have often argued that most of the time, politicians don't rate us as citizens. Most of the time, they don't care about us. Most of the time, they don't care about our needs. Most of the time, they don't care about our interests. Most of the time, politicians within the National Assembly itself cares about the next election. And anything that will hinder them from the possibility of a return to the National Assembly, they block it by all means possible. They make it look like those two amendments passed yesterday were the only amendment that Nigerian civil society organizations, different interest groups and individuals are called for. That is just a fragment of many demands that have been made. I'm a member of the civil society group for election monitoring. And I tell you that after every election, what we do is to collate observations and things that were not done right in an election, forward it to INEC. INEC will organize an interactive session, which I've been part of several times, to discuss some of these observations and how best we think they can be resolved ahead of the next election. But most of the time, that is where it ends, because politics comes in. The two bills passed into law yesterday, for me, none of the two is people-centered. The issue of electronic and manual, electronic transmission of results backed by manual, whatever, it's just one of the many issues. I've told you, for me, that is maybe fair enough. Electronic voting, yes, backed up with manual where internet fails and all of that. But the question is, I can mention at the tip of my fingers more than 8 other reforms that civil society organizations and individuals have called for that INEC has looked away from. A lot of Nigerians have suddenly forgotten that for over 8 years now, we have been agitating for electronic voting, which has not seen the light of the day since 2015. This is 2026, about 11 years after.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, instead of us to be drumming it harder, that everything that needs to be done should be done. 11 years is a long time. Why should I have to queue on the day of election, leaving my job, leaving my business, leaving my family, under the scorching sun, discomfort? It's not as if the federal government is making provision for water, for drinks, or for light refreshments. People will queue, be on the queue for 2-3 hours because they want to exercise their rights as citizens. And then they will tell you, oh, one machine is not working, Vivas is not working, you might end up spending 4-5 hours. So what happens to a push or to a review of the electoral law to allow for electronic voting, in which case people can vote at the comfort of their home, wherever they find themselves at any time, within a given period of time, maybe 2 or 3 days when election will take place. All of a sudden, such people-centered amendment is looked away from. We have also advanced that a lot of Nigerians are disenfranchised on the day of election in the name of special duty. On the day of election, civil defense, or let's say generally all members of the paramilitary organizations involved in the election, the police, the FRST, nurses on special duties, doctors on special duties, and the rest of them. These people are disenfranchised on the day of election because they are on national assignment. Somebody who is serving in Oshobo is taken to somebody somewhere like Sokoto or Kaduna to go and police the electoral process, thereby denying some people of their voting rights. And they are in millions. So what happens to those votes? At the end of the day in election, you'll be talking about, oh, Nigerian vote is about 12 million. One party got 4 million, another one got 8 million. The question is, what is the fraction of 12 million votes out of about 200 million Nigerians? One of the reasons why we have such fragmented votes is because millions of Nigerians on essential duties are denied their right to vote on the day of election. And as a society organization, we've advocated over the years that there must be a mix, either pre-election day, whereby all the people on essential duties are made to exercise their franchise and their votes must count. Nobody is talking about that now, but everybody is protesting about transition or no transition of results. Would it have mattered less, or maybe it will have mattered less how election is transmitted if we have more people voting? Imagine that all these categories of people I've mentioned are allowed to vote, and on the day of election, you are having about 100 million votes across Nigeria. What makes you think that the vote of this category of people I've mentioned, if it goes in a particular direction, would not have changed the narrative of who wins an election, who becomes governor, who becomes president? But they are disenfranchised. And we have called for this reform, for reform in this aspect. Nobody is talking about it. We have also talked about diaspora voting. Millions of Nigerians are outside of the country, either legitimately or otherwise, either for duties or for the otherwise. Well, on the day of election, because they are outside of the shop of the country, they are denied opportunity of deciding who leads or who rules them, because our electoral law does not provide for diaspora voting. So why don't we begin to mount pressure on the National Assembly to bring some of these reforms into place that will change the face of our electoral process? So there are many more electoral laws or electoral reforms that have been agitated for, but we are looking away. We have now majorly on the minor and minorly on the major, just because politicians have shifted our attention from the real issues to issues that they feel will benefit them through whatever political strategy, in quotes now, that they have to win elections. So for me, none of the two, as yet today, is people-centered.
All right, Doctor, because we are really out of time now, I want you to quickly answer this. Talking about the elections, the election that was slated for March is being talked, to be moved upwards to probably February or January. It's still in talks because of Ramadan and Lent. Because of Ramadan majorly. But I'd like to ask you, really, people have been talking, saying that some of these officials are going to be observing the fast and all of this. In other climes, especially for the core Muslim societies, states, they probably won't even they won't slate or schedule an election during that period in the first place before they talk about, bringing upward and all of that. I'd like to ask your view, what your opinion is, if this is the real way, if this is the way to go, if other alternatives could not have been looked into as against this move that is being, deliberated upon.
See, all of this boils down to failure of reforms. And I don't want us to look like it is a Ramadan thing. For example, in this year, now Ramadan starts today. Today too is Ash Wednesday, which commemorates the beginning of the fasting for the Christians, the Lenten period. So which means both the Muslim and the Christians will be fasting along the same period. So if this calendar is repeated next year, it does not have to do with the Muslims, so that we don't streamline it to a religion, the particular religion. It's about the Christians and the Muslims, whether this year or next year. So the question would be, what were the intentions, or how careful were the members of the board of INEC or the decision-making body of INEC when they were facing election for February 20 next year? Does it mean that we do not have smart people among them who could have projected into the future and know what the likelihood of the calendar for fasting of Muslims and Christians would be? That is a failure on the part of INEC. When I talked about institutional reforms or failure of reforms, would it have mattered if we are voting electronically? How would it have mattered whether you are fasting as a Christian or a Muslim? If within 2 minutes on your phone or your iPad or your laptop, you can cast your vote and you are done with. Who will care about whether you are fasting or not? Because it doesn't take anything away from you. How would it matter if we are following the standard the international standard across other nations of the world, whereby election takes place within a specific number of hours in the day, and it's not going to take a whole day thing that is energy sapping? So when people are making it look like it's a religious, it is not. It is wrong, whether for Muslims or Christians, to fix the election during the lengthy season of either the Christians or the Muslim. It is wrong because our electoral process is not yet mature enough not to sap energy. I gave you instances that on the day of election, people go out as early as 7 a.m. And by the time you get there, you already met a queue. And then you line up. It might not beat your turn until 3 p.m., 4 p.m. for election that is supposed to stop at 2. You are still at the polling unit till 2, 3, 4 p.m. because you want to cast your vote and you want to see who won in your unit. So for somebody who is fasting, whether it's a Muslim or a Christian, and you leave your house at 7 a.m., no time to pray, no time to take a nap, no time to relax, and then you are standing from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., how reasonable it is for any human being. So apart from the fact that INEC didn't do well enough not to have been careful in the fixing of timetable for election, it also boils down to institutional reform, that if we are doing the right thing, it would not have mattered whether Christians are fasting or Muslims are fasting, because we could have done all of this in the comfort of our homes without anybody having this or energy being fact.
All right, thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us today. You've really made light and sense of this conversation. Dr. Ayo Ologun, human rights activist and then a political activist for us right here on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, dear viewer, that's the size of the program for this morning. Different issues, lots of, talking points right there. But this is where we draw the curtain right here for this midweek installment of Morning Spring Western Spring Television for today. My name is Timitope Ajijola Oluwala. See you again.
Very many thanks for being a part of the show today. Let's do this again tomorrow, same time, Western Spring Television. I am Olufemi Alabi. God bless you. God bless Nigeria.